one more time the first Vice President of the International Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations. He is also the chairperson of the African American Studies Department at Howard University. He is my little brother, my dear friend, Dr. Greg Kimathi.
Hotel.
Elders, may I continue? Thank you. Tony, that's all right? Good. All right. Well, this is always very good for any time we get to come back to Ohio. Of course, this is Mario's home state, away from home, retirement. I was here for 5 years, so and this is our home region. So it's always good to be here. Today, I thought what I would do is talk a little bit about the theme, and in the context of the theme, maybe throw out some ideas around this question of literacy and how we go about the process of remembering, thinking all the time that we're having this conversation in English, albeit African American English, and that every experience that we have is a subsequent set of experiences that we add on to the ones we've had before. So it's very difficult, and as you just saw, my brother, what you just saw in this brilliant interrogation of language, how do we parse and how do we get beyond other people's interpretations? All the time being very mindful of the fact that each subsequent experience we've had has shaped our ability to interpret. So it makes for a kind of a dynamic process, and as Brother Bernacchi said earlier, this question of Hepra, this question of becoming, this question of being is a spiritual question, and nothing that has been experienced is wasted. It's all a process of becoming. So I thought I would start with just some images, and every time I put together a PowerPoint now, I try to put together, I'm learning every time, and Noel has continued to tutor. So I'm trying to get a little bit better about these images. So most of these are familiar, of course, Jehudi and Sachet, and battery out on this joint right here, I think. No, not quite. Yeah, Jehudi and Sachet, and over there on the far right for you. And underneath children, you see a picture actually of a young brother. That was from September. That was from September. We actually had some young men pour libation at Carr Hall in Washington, D.C. I had some batteries, but I guess I didn't. Every man who lives in that dormitory, the freshman class, the night before school started, had to get on one knee and dedicate their year and their college education to their ancestors and to the members of their family who had sent them there. So it's a ritual we started several years ago. So you see them, that's one of the young brothers right here pouring libation. Of course, you see Jehudi. So the body of respect, of course, we are in the Midwest region. We're in the state of Ohio. The brother on the left, his physical remains are not in Ohio. That's actually in Washington, D.C., at the top of a hill in Arlington National Cemetery. I took that picture on Memorial Day. That's Colonel Charles Young, of course, brilliant brother who is professor of languages and professor of military science. And this was the brother who was very good friends, of course, with W.B. Du Bois, who, when the United States Army decided to retire him, rather than promote him or run the risk that he would be promoted during World War II, rode his horse from here to Washington, D.C. to make the point that he was just fine to engage in military combat if necessary. He passed away after being sent to Africa. He died there. The military sent him all kind of places. Never really went, he made magic. It's kind of, I'm really honored to be here with Professor Peter sitting here, because I think, your work, as I said, if I had known you were going to be here, I would have gone through my collection and bought all the books that you've written that I have. Can you say? But, how many times have you and others told this story, particularly in your history of Dayton and history of the surrounding area, how this brother was one of the great heroes of not only only, well, I'll say American history, but that's too short-sighted. I mean, the stink that was raised, Du Bois raised in the Crisis magazine when the Army treated Charles Young the way it did. They sent him out west, so he took a bunch of brothers and basically created the roads that paved to the national parks. That's exactly right. Then they sent him to West Africa, and of course he's gaining scholarship the whole way. This guy was an incredible scholar and an artist, and I mean just a brilliant brother. And when he passed away there, you know, the outcry began to raise, and finally they had to bring Charles Young's body back to the United States. And he was buried in Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors, and at the time was one of, if not the largest ritual burial there. Black folks lined the streets of Washington, D.C. to see the funeral of Colonel Charles Young. And of course, to the right, of course, Martin Robeson Delaney. And that particular shrine is a direct consequence of the work of the women and men of the association. Particularly, I think about the Kimathi Institute folk in Chicago who go as an annual ritual every year, who lead that. And of course, Larry Crow. And Larry, when we think about both of these brothers when he mentioned them earlier today. So let's start with a moment of Sankofa Wisdom. Of course, this is very familiar to all of us. I use this slide a lot. These quotes, of course, come from Meta Dr. Carruthers' examination into the deep thought of Africa through the question of history, historical memory. The most serious threat to African dignity is in the domain of intellectual ability. And of course, that's the number. In the second quote, African champions must break the chain that links African ideas to European ideas and speak to their ancestors without interpreters, which then raises the question, what is the role of Sankofa in this process? Literally going back and getting it, going to get it. You know, what is the process of speaking to ancestors without interpreters when everything that has happened since the original speeches, since those first speeches that have echoed through the universe are linked to each other through experiences? Again, we're having this conversation in English. So how many iterations of the ways that we have communicated have been intersected by other experiences? So that as we speak to our ancestors, how many other ways can we access beyond the spoken word, beyond the written word, and how do we tie them to the spoken word, the written word, and all forms of communication, so that we know that act of recovery isn't a living in the past, but is in fact a visioning of the present and the future. What is the role of Sankofa in this process? Well, one of the first things we have to do is deal with this question of regimes of truth. How many folks have seen the second making of the film 12 Years a Slave, this recently, right? Okay, seen, right? And of course, the first one that was made, Gordon Parks, Sam Mark Williams, the dramatist, wrote the script, and Gordon Parks shot that film, and PBS showed it. It was called Solomon Northup's Odyssey. And we were laughing about it on the way back up here. You know, Avery Brooks played Solomon Northup in that. He played a man called Hawk version, really, of Solomon Northup, because he was shoving around people and I'm not a slave. I mean, I think I really prefer his performance to no shade on Ezekiel Ejiofor. You know, he's my man. He's a great actor. But I will say this: a regime of truth is one that seems to be about one thing, but it's always about something else. This, of course, is some of the cast of 12 Years a Slave. Brad Pitt with his white Jesus type hair, looking proprietary as he leans in over the young lady who's from Mexico or East Africa. I forget which one. They like to exoticize black people so much. Her tormentor, and then this could very easily be Kerry Washington over here, and whatever the white president's name is on Scandal over here. Certainly that moment when they're in the barn and he's leaning over her shoulder and says, "Oh, my queen of the nigger's queen." I mean, I'm saying, this is what I say every Thursday night on ABC. But this is the culprit right here in the middle. The director, Steve McQueen. Brother McQueen from London, folks from Grenada. You know, when asked in Miami at the National Association of Black Journalists several months ago about why he didn't cast more Africans born in the United States in these roles, his response was that there weren't African-American actors that could have brought this off. Unfortunately, if Denzel was 20 years younger, perhaps he could have used him, but he's not, so he couldn't. So he had to go find folks with the range. He didn't know if the African-American actors could connect with the material. Really? Really? If you read Armand White's critique of 12 Years a Slave in New York, one of the New York newspapers, White is he didn't like anything, which is one of the reasons why I kind of like him, because I don't have to agree with him, because he knows so much film that if you're going to argue with him, you should probably know what you're talking about, otherwise he's going to embarrass you. His thing is, Steve McQueen's films deal with gratuitous violence. If you've seen any of his other work, he's well known, particularly in Great Britain, for this thing where he's going to go all in. Somebody's going to get slashed, some blood, it's going to be somebody beaten to a pulp. So, enslavement is a perfect subject for him. So you see the violence. But in many ways, Gordon Parks' version and Sam Hart Williams and Avery Brooks' version of 12 Years a Slave gets a very much closer to the idea of human beings who are resisting a condition. And you know, most of the young people, particularly who are seeing this film, have never seen Holly Greenwood's film Sankofa, have never seen Quilombo, have never seen Julie Dash's beautiful Daughters of the Dust. So they really don't have a sense of the range of black humanity. What they see is black people getting the hell beat out of them and saying, man, that's what our ancestors went through. Yeah, but where's the notion of resistance? Because, you know, this guy is not even free. You know, Solomon was not free. He was a slave without a master in Albany. Or he's as free in Albany as he is in Louisiana, and that the subject position of African people is always something we have to think about how it's represented, the politics of representation. I'll read the quote there to your right. This is from Cedric Robinson, who I use a lot. This is from his book, Forgeries of Memory and Meaning. Because what he's saying is, when you see these films, they reinforce stereotypes we have about black people. Now, I've seen the film twice for free, because Howard sent us out to go look at screenings and then have these talk-back conversations. And in the last one, I was just finally tired of being polite. It was Michael Eric Dyson was on the panel as well. That brother got that so fast it wasn't even funny. I'm like, look, I'm tired of these. Look, when are we going to have a real conversation about enslavement? You know, you see one Negro trying to escape and trying to be free, and the rest of the Negroes is kind of like just walking around like they scared to say something. So that is not an accurate representation of our people during enslavement. And people come out like, I really have a better understanding. No, you don't. What you have is a reinscription of the regime of truth. And what does Cedric Robinson say the regime of truth is? He says, in materialist terms, the simplest rendering is that the commercial nexus, and these are the things that combine, the commercial nexus of number one, the African slave trade, and number two, the political apparatus of colonialism. Number three, the economies of securing and controlling African bodies. Number four, the sinews of patriarchy. And number five, the trade in slave-produced commodities, that's the relations of powers, eventuated in the establishment of the Negro. In other words, this subject that's no longer an African in the, you know, was never an African. They didn't know who we were. So all these things conspire to create this subject. Now, once you created that subject, you have discourses on race, which means admissible and possible knowledges. You can't even think your way out of it once you've accepted the Negro as the subject. So any notion of resistance, and John Henry Clark said this a lot more eloquently in many ways, and by eloquently saying eloquently, he used good speech to say, if you start your history with slavery, everything since then looks like progress. That's kind of like what they're saying. So I mean, you know, look at how much we resist. No, you can't even see the humanity in this situation. He goes on to say, and since the historical and cultural African subject has been unimagined, meaning what? You haven't even thought about these people as human beings. Just basically, like, it's almost like, you know how white folks cringe anytime they see a pet get hit or something like that. That's the kind of response that you see to 12 Years a Slave. Oh God. Like the ASPCA, this will be an ASPCA endorsed film. They're abusing these poor animals. You know, you go and since they haven't been imagined as human beings, since they haven't been imagined, there's no reason to suspect that some of the, quote, imperfections of domination, in other words, some of the fact that they don't like this, might arise or originate from the enslaved. In other words, they don't like this not just because the whip doesn't feel good, they don't like this because they're human beings. And I thought, Larry, what you did with the earlier by reading the letter, that was perfect. I'm a human being. You owe me. You ain't gonna pay me, but I'm gonna go through all this right here. You know what I'm saying? You're not gonna take my humanity. I'm glad you're still alive. And by the way, send me what was $11,000 as a change. And you know, make sure you send it to this address, and then we might talk about how much you're gonna pay me going forward. In other words, that's a human being interacting. White folks don't know what to do with that, and unfortunately, neither do many of our children. Because the first thing they would say is, that's not true. Like you said, they would go with the scholars and say, oh, that's not true. That can't be true. They couldn't write like that. They couldn't, I mean, they said Solomon Northup didn't write his piece. But we continue, he says, or alternatively, there's another explanation, that the manufacture of the slave might anticipate and absorb the availability of more tractable materials. Meaning what? It means that the manufacture of enslaved Africans might bring into the culture our capacity to resist. Nobody ever thought about that. I'm sure those who crashed this language together we call English would never have imagined that we might use it as a weapon of liberation. So as we engage in this question of Sankofa, we're reappropriating Akan and Yoruba, we're appropriating Medunetia, we're bringing our languages back into ourselves, but we're bringing them back into ourselves with the materials that we have absorbed in this experience. It makes for an incredibly complicated proposition. There's no one way to get there. And ASCAC attempting to take on the attitude that we can absorb as many of these conversations as we can and make some sense of this into some rhythm, that is probably the most daunting challenge any single group of African people have ever tried to take on in the last 5 centuries. And I'm not exaggerating, because it really is literally about trying to help people remember. First, by helping ourselves remember. And we're facing all kind of stuff, whether it be John O'Brien from slavery to freedom, or our favorite imp that runs through the world, perhaps the eschew of the early 21st century, Henry Louis Gates, who is known for creating situations where you have to choose. And now maybe that's not nice, because he did write a book where he talks about eschew a little bit. But I may attribute a little bit of eschew to him, because Henry Louis Gates may not be good, he may not be bad, but one of the things, going to irritate the hell out of you until you make a choice. What you gonna do? We're at a crossroads. This guy appears because we haven't shut him down. He's an important figure. I welcome Skip Gates, because as long as we haven't done our work, they will continue to use him. In fact, the more success we have, the more we'll see of him. In fact, his appearance is probably indication of how good we're doing. Because if we weren't doing well, we wouldn't get a dime. With his silly-minded many rivers, we have many rivers to cross, brother. So there's nothing wrong from learning from hindsight. Sankofa, literally go back and retrieve. Or as some Akan speakers, every time I ask them, tree speakers, they say, how does it mean? The literal translation we have, go get it. Get it. What is the thing then? Get it. What is the it to get? Because the it is constantly being created. 10 minutes ago is the past. So we had to go get that. Means somebody take notes, somebody got to watch the video, somebody do it. The go get is a relational, there's a relational dynamic in going to get. What that debate did in going over millennia to get something brings that into our memory now. That happened right now. And it shortens the time frame. So the present in some ways is the only time we have if we think about ourselves in time and space. And of course we see the various manifestations of Sankofa. You see the curls here and then the kind of curve here in Sankofa. This is a battle Sankofa because it's straight out. And of course the bird retrieving with the egg. So what is the crisis of the Negro intellectual and opportunity of Sankofa moments? This too is a slide I've used many times before. E. Franklin Frazier, and this of course we see Dr. Carruthers open a discussion of E. Franklin Frazier when he goes to this conference and he says, I was talking about the race question and the Africans from other parts of the world wanted to talk about the big philosophical questions. And at that point Franklin Frazier realizes that educated Negroes or Negro intellectuals have failed to achieve any intellectual freedom, in other words, black Americans. In fact, it appears that the Negro intellectual is unconscious of the extent to which his thinking is restricted to sterile repetitions of the safe and conventional ideas current in American society. Meaning what? Well, stuff like who was black in America. So how far are you remembering? I'm not remembering when black didn't exist. I'm remembering whiteness. And so now I'm going to talk about blackness and whiteness. It's a race dialogue. That's admissible and possible knowledges. In other words, what is it even possible for me to think about once I've accepted this is my point of departure? In the middle there, of course, this is the travesty that goes on every Thursday night. The fantasy rape in the White House that's enabled by corporate media. And the thousands and millions of people, and I hope there are no Scandal fans in here because I do watch it. I watch all of them. I wait till about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and then watch them 2 or 3 days after they go on because my students watch it. So I'm going to watch it. I'm going to watch it. It has jumped the shark every time. This last one, your dad had the president in the plane and had a hit on your mom. Okay, this is so absurd now. It's beyond the notion of even bad television. This is Jerry Springer land. But the central motif is every Thursday night, this black woman is going to get raped. Right. Either by the president, by his boy, by some old random cat that comes in, he's going to snatch her in a broom closet in the White House. Come on. And we were just like, what is there to talk about? What is there to talk about? Harold Ford running for Senate in Tennessee with the Confederate flag and a honey cap on like that was going to help him. Melissa Harris Perry with tampons in her ears trying to make some point about feminism and reproductive rights. Nobody even look. How can anybody respect black people if they watch television? Seriously. Now, this one over here, I just cut and paste this off. This was CNN. Just before 12 Years a Slave came out, they sent a camera crew to Howard, and I sat down for about 30 minutes with, I forget the guy's name. Oh, I can't think of his name. And he's one of those CNN anchors. I don't know, they're interchangeable, these white men. But You see at the bottom there, it says 12 years a slave and the trauma of enslavement. Now, they left most of what I said on the cutting room floor, as I knew they did. But anytime I get interviewed for one of these things that are going to be on television or radio, I'm trying to figure out the best way possible to send a message to black people with the shortest phrase possible so that whatever I say, I know you're going to leave 89, 95% of it out, but if I can, every word I say, I'm trying to make sure you don't have a 3-word gap that you can edit out something. So out of everything, at least that got in. Enslavement. I mean, that's a small thing. But not to say slavery. I refuse. You talking to me for 30 minutes, I'm thinking in my mind, I'm not going to say slavery. I'm very not the way slavery is. So you couldn't put slavery in. Now, that may seem like a small thing, but if that becomes part of the parlance, that allows a bridge to walk across with Sankofa, and maybe when a 12-year-old or a 25-year-old or a 52-year-old gets introduced to the identity with people who were enslaved, who were pressed into service, it won't be foreign, at least the concept won't be foreign to them. But that's difficult work, and I'm saying ASCAC does that all the time, particularly in the area of symbols. We do a lot of that work. So what is the relationship then of human memory to identity and recovery? What is the relational dynamic of becoming? Benachi, you really hit it on the head, brother. This question, there's no that spiritual material divide, just erasing that. How do you do that? Because we're always becoming. We're becoming right now. We're becoming in every moment. Becoming. What is the relational dynamic? How do you cut it down? Well, when we think about history, and this is something Obama used to always say, he would make a distinction between history, historiography, and historicity. History, memory. What happened, right? Historiography, how you inscribe what happened, inscription of memory and vision. As Anderson Thompson, as Brother Kimathi, my brother said earlier, you know, Thompson and John Henry Clark said history is about the future, right? So historiography is how you narrate your narrative. What do you remember, because you selected that out, and then how do you vision going forward, right? But then historicity is the concept of oneself in time and space. In other words, you're looking at yourself doing this. You're remembering the experiences, but now you're thinking about how you remember the experiences. You're narrating what happened, but you're also thinking about how you're narrating. We do that every day when we self-censor. Where you been? Self-censor. Oh, went to the store, and then you're leaving stuff out the whole time based on who this person is and what you need them to think about next. That's no different than how groups do it. But the process of doing that then leaves us with a real challenge. Because who are we then? How do we deal with identity? What is the relationship of human memory to identity in that process? We're talking about going and get something. Because every time we go back and get it different, it's going to shape how we look going forward. Our objectives change. You know, we want to get Barack Obama elected. So what do? We censored his history. And I ain't got to tell nobody from the Midwest region, particularly Chicago, that this man got a pass. He's getting a pass right now. 50 years from now, we may have thrown him in a garbage can, because maybe by then 2 or 3 black women would have been president of the United States. Maybe 2 or 3 of them will be speaking Spanish, but that'll be okay, because we got to build that bridge. You know, we got 2 black justices on the Supreme Court, but one of them speaks Spanish, so we always say Sonia Sotomayor from Puerto Rico is somehow Latino and not Afro-Latino. But we have to rethink how we remember to allow us to have different conversations. But as we're doing that, you know, Obama got a pass. He may not get a pass 20 years from now. He may not get a pass 50 years from now. He may not get a pass next year. But a lot of it will depend on how we narrate the memory. That changes how people think about things. And it's not a pleasant conversation. It's not an easy conversation, but it's better to have more information than less, unless it's not. I mean, and I say that thinking about the UNESCO General History of Africa, Volume 1 on historiography, where Ampate Ba, thank you, is talking about this question of the Jali, you know, the so-called griot. He said there are different people for different roles. You got some who have to narrate everything as it occurred. Then you got some Jalis, some narrative rememberers who are the hype men. Your family's so bad, you don't go bit a white man's nose off and escape. Now, he's leaving out all the other stuff, the families, the people, the infidelity, But that moment, and everybody in here has somebody like that in your family history. The bad guy, the woman who did this and wouldn't stand for all the other stuff has been left in the past. Now, 100 years from now, your great-great-great-great-grandchildren on Ancestry.com, and they got a DNA test that now reanimates all the story, and they get all the other stuff. Now they're looking at you like, why didn't you tell me? Right. The choices we make are constantly about how we narrate the present. That's why this book is very interesting. David Christian, this book, The Fleeting World, it starts starts with this idea. He gets all these high school teachers together. He says, tell me what you know about American history. And so they all start telling all these stories, 1776, Civil War, blah, 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 Spanish-American War, Teddy Roosevelt, Rough Riders, blah, 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 Roosevelt, blah, blah, blah. Tell me what you know about Western civilization. Okay, Charlemagne, Holy Roman Empire, Napoleon, blah, 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 Greeks, Romans, blah, 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 something about Sumer. Was it Sumer or was it Iraq? I don't know. Henry Robert Cole. I mean, they're just throwing stuff out, right? Tell me what you know about world history. Christopher Columbus, Ferdinand Magellan, age exploration, blah, blah, blah. And then they start feeling bad. So they say, oh yeah, there's some Indians and Chinese too. And Africa is a continent. I mean, that's all they know. What about African history?
Blank.
Nelson Mandela. Desmond Tutu. Thank you. I mean, right. Silence. That's somebody older in the room, because the 30-year-olds are like, who is that? Oh, is that the guy? Wait a minute, oh, I saw that movie. That was one with Jamie Foxx, right? In other words, it just devolves into regimes of truth. Admissible and possible knowledges. And this was school teachers. This is the point he's making in this book before he goes into it. But of course, what do? We turn Africa right side up in the preliminary challenge, and we still got to figure out how to get that book in the room and all the volumes that come after it. That's what ASCAC has begun to do. So the Sankofa thrust then asks the question, what are we after with this process? What are we after once we have more memories, this recovery project? Well, I use W.E.B. Du Bois and Martin King in this one. Human justice and black humanity. This is what Dr. Du Bois says. This is after he just said, the hell with it, I'm leaving, he's in Ghana. He's just there. I'm not coming back. He leaves a note. One of the things he writes is, chin up and fight on, but remember that American Negroes can't win. Come on, man, that's it. 90 years old, that's it. I did the best I could. Come on, Shirley, let's go. We're going to Ghana. And Crew would say, we got courage, very nice. All right. He says this, though, what I have been fighting for, and he tells this to some school teachers at Johnson C. Smith University in 1960. He says, what I've been fighting for, and I'm still fighting for, is the possibility of black folk and their cultural patterns existing in America without discrimination and on terms of equality. That's the legal thing. But then here's the big thing. He said, what we must do is accomplish two things. The utter elimination of color discrimination in American life, fine. And the preservation of African history and culture as a valuable contribution to modern civilization as it was to medieval and ancient civilization. In other words, I'm for the legal equality so we can be get out of the process of having to worry about riding on buses and not having jobs. Then we get in the process of saying Sankofa. That's what I'm really after. So don't confuse the rights with who we are. And that's very important because the narrative is used often, these admissible and possible knowledges, to make all the black existence about legal equality. No, you don't even know who we are. It's like watching 12 Years a Slave. The man got out, he's with his family again. Oh, but if you read the book, as many of y'all have, Sullivan Northrup says, you know, the thing that pained me was as I was leaving, I left everybody else there. That's why I wrote this book. We got to get them out. But if you watch the movie, people believe, oh, it had a happy ending. It had a damn happy ending. You know why it doesn't have a happy ending? And this, I got into a beef with, of all people, Roland Martin. I didn't get into beef. I was asleep. This dude on Twitter trying to call me out on Twitter because at the end of the film, one of the Howard students said, 12 years of slavery's still going on. It's an industrial complex. And this fool said, I'm a free man. I said, that's absurd. He said, what? I said, that's absurd. You're absurd. Get him back to school. And then I left. I went to sleep. I woke up about 4:30 in the morning. This dude all over Twitter. Who is that? But what he didn't realize, there's an army of Negroes on Twitter. So they had all jumped on him. So by the time they were kind of everybody calm down. They want us to debate, but I'm not going to debate Roland Martin. Because first of all, he has disappeared. He apparently didn't want to do that. But Martin King says, this I love the speech King gave. He said, if you will protest courageously and yet with dignity and Christian love, so there he is with his worldview, his historicity. He says when the history books are written in future generations, meaning what? Now he's looking forward. The historians will have to pause and say there lived the great people of black people who injected new meaning and dignity into the veins of civilization. Who knows what Martin Luther King would have been if he continued to live physically? But that marker lets you know he sees himself in time and space, and more importantly, he's giving that talk in Montgomery to black people who thought, I thought this was just about staying off the bus. Now they start seeing themselves in history. And once you start seeing yourself in history, you start making different kind of decisions. So, you know, a component of the work of ASCAC is helping people reveal and challenge those regimes of truth. Sankofa techniques for studying Africa wherever you find it. Translation and recovery. We saw a great example of that a moment ago. Intellectual genealogies, linking people together. How do we look at genealogies of African intellectual work in order to do a couple of things? Identify extensions and continuities. How have we continued to be the same even as we are different from moment to moment? How we continue to become, in other words. And then to use different tools for examining African ideas about life, reality, and purpose. I always use the cosmogram because it's cyclical. You know, it gives you a sense of cycle, past, present, future, and going in cycle. This is a cover of an exhibition that was at the African Museum of African Art in D.C., African Cosmos. But the reason I had that picture in the middle there, that brother was at the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, the one that black people mostly came to. You know, Negroes have to work. So they went on the one on the weekend. The one Obama had was on a Wednesday. It's like, yeah, dude, I don't even know why you wouldn't even come. But that was on Al Sharpton, who was trying to create his own set of memories as if he can somehow move history by himself. I love this picture with this brother, right? I said, bro, can I take your picture? Why? Because you got on a Frederick Douglass t-shirt with an Ankh and an Obama hat. Now, this is a man who is Sankofa, but his Sankofa is beautifully syncretic. This is an African memory. Now, what you gonna do with that Negro? He got classical Africa, he got agitate, and he got Obama on the top. Like, this is a moment of culmination, and he's happy about it. And he's at this ritual celebration. How do we help him challenge the regime of truth? Right. Because he's ready. He's looking for it, and he's happy about it. Now, I'm going to skip over this remembering from our deep well, because Mario has talked about this situation with Isis, Osiris, and Horus. So, and the Sankofa moment means that we start with classical Africa, and we move out in concentric circles all the time, keeping our memories, migrating, improvising. Then we get to the point where we reblend our inscriptions, we reblend our stuff, and we're at the point now on this outer edge where we are institutionalizing translation and recovery as essential elements of scribal training. That's our study group process. We're trying to create institutions where this happens. So what processes can we have for recovery? That's the study group imperative, turning the world into a classroom. How do we turn the world into a classroom? Well, it's a unique responsibility for those of us tasked with finding and spreading Sankofa techniques to do so beyond what might be considered reasonable. Slavery was not reasonable, but it was effective. Jim Crow and apartheid were not reasonable, but they were effective. When we face institutions, you cannot stop to lament the disadvantage. We must fight with everything we have, taking the time to revel and rejoice in our lives, even as we struggle. Don't go around the world and not go the last two steps. Just at the point, like these brothers here, this was at the 50th anniversary as well. We're walking down the middle of Constitution Avenue. Here are the police, because they got every cop they can, and the army all out in case Negroes go wild. And these brothers standing behind them, justice for all. They just standing here. Now, you got your hands on your hips like you're in control, but you know the whole time he was like, this army's not, man, these guys, somebody gonna come for my gun, I don't know. Because I watched them for a long time when I took that picture. This is the fear of America. That's why they shut the government down, because they know it's coming. It can't be stopped. White folks ain't having no babies and everybody else is. Meaning what? This moment is already over. Sankofa is also about going forward. Meaning what? As it was before, so it's about to be again. This thing, y'all are done. And if we act like they're done, they will be done in terms of their ability to affect our lives. So, is education the great equalizer? If learning is linked to wisdom, this is the former president of Howard, they just pushed him out. They're pushing out black college presidents now like they're going like in style. This is a talk he gave about a week and a half ago to the freshmen. You know, and every time they have a talk at Howard in the Crampton Auditorium for our freshman class with a PowerPoint, I'll tell them to leave their flash drive and just load it onto my computer so I can always get to Africa in front of these Negroes. No, but that's a good brother right there. So Dr. Rameau is talking about Du Bois. We've been trying to move now, not 2, not 10, not 100, not 500, but 1,000 plus freshmen a year into this different way of thinking. If all of them move a little bit, we'll make a transformation. Some of them have moved a lot. Many of them are now taking better lecture from Dr. Beatty, and he has now succeeded to have not only ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs 1, but 1, 2, 3, and now he's going to teach Coptic in the spring. Meaning what? We're moving slowly to the next place. So the challenges we have to translation and recovery is literacy and transition. Literacy and transition threatens the following elements of mastery. Meaning what? Literacy has moved from, when most of us began. Mastery of process has moved from the slow practice of reading to skimming. And from the slow practice of research to assembling. I don't like that. They say, I got my book on my Kindle, Dr. Carr. I don't like that. Because when I ask a question, you put a word search in. And you try to beat me to the answer, and you don't even make no sense. Well, what did he say about Rwanda? We said Rwanda is where they had an underwear bomb. No, the words Rwanda and underwear bomb were together because that sentence is about like what happened in Rwanda. They worried about a underwear bomber that came. You were looking for you're not reading. You're looking for words. That's what Google does. That's one of our challenges in transition. Mastery of content, the slow practice of knowing, critical intelligence versus access to information. People just get blitzes of information. The mastery of language, speech as value, not volume. Not so social network. The social network is rewiring. I just want to say something quick and flip. So, and finally, the mastery of teaching and learning, the function of the three learning space authorities. The teacher, the text, and the student. Those are the three authorities in any classroom. The purpose is to rescue, reconstruct, and restore. But you see teachers being taken out of the conversation. Give them all iPads, and you can figure it out, and we'll have people answer questions afterwards. Whoa! What just happened? No, we're going to massive online open courses, and y'all just need to do that. Everything's on the internet. And my question I always ask students, okay, I'm for that, but one question. What? Well, two actually. What? Do you have kids? Yes. Two. Do they do this? That's all I needed to hear. You can leave now. Because they're not doing this at Harvard, they're not doing this at Stanford. Oh yeah, they're going to get this massive online stuff, but at the core, they still mouth to ear, face to face. 2 minutes, thank you. All right. So the function of literacy is to close these speech gaps. Illiteracy, I can't read. Illiteracy, I can, but I choose not to read. Fast thinking and slow thinking means mastery of technique. This is a great content mastery, the ability to help students achieve mastery. You got to slow your thinking down, and unfortunately, I'm talking fast because I have too many words, but we need more words. This, of course, these are 3 articles that were in the New York Times over the last couple of years. The Hart-Risley study that says by age 3, you hear 1,000 versus 525 words, and some. I'm sorry, that's the IQ gap. But let me go to this other Fernal study. This was a couple of weeks ago. Some of y'all started the New York Times, the bottom one. By age 3, you have children in this country who have heard 30 million more words than other children that same age that are in a different income bracket. And of the words they hear, the children who get beat up in the lower income bracket will hear 75,000 approximately encouragements and 200,000 discouragements. Ain't no children here, right? I'm going to speak candidly. I was let me go forward. I was actually out with this brother the other day, Kerry James Marshall. I wish he was Luke Alexander. Some of y'all know this brother, brilliant artist. You know, man, he's a man. He was at the National Art Gallery last Sunday. I went to see the talking, and after we went out to dinner, I've been stalking this dude. I take everybody down there to see his stuff. And so he was saying, you know, we were talking about this word gap. His wife Cheryl, just amazing. You know, we were talking about that study, and she said, "Carrie, tell me about that story where these kids came by the house, and she said that somebody had rung the doorbell or rung the bell, and he heard the adult, which he presumed was the mother, say, 'Stop touching shit.'" That's what our kids hear all the time. What the hell, you really ignorant? Stop touching shit. But these are the words, and so they don't even hear enough words, and the words they hear are discouragements. Please forgive my speech, but my point is that there are other ways to get to restorative literacy. And in fact, I'll just go back now. Reading and writing matters. This is a Sankofa process for engendering intellectual work. The text has to be simple. That's my nephew this summer sitting at the desk. I would pretend like I was asleep and say, "Auntie, go in here and get the paper off the stoop and read the front page and let me know what's the most important articles." And then I would come in and say, "See what he's doing here." This is him and his buddy standing at the grave of Thurgood Marshall. Took him out to Arlington. I mean, you know, it's not just about reading. You got to connect that stuff to other forms of literacy. And everything is a text. It's time for me to stop. Okay, then let me stop going forward. I was going to talk about coolness, which I really won't have a chance to do. Duke Ellington basically said intellectual work is cool. That's him and Howard talking. Kerry James Marshall does the same thing in his work. Yeah, I love that one to the left, that Turner with the head of his master. That's hanging up in the National Art Gallery in the tower, because he got to pick one. He said, "Pick whichever one you want." In addition to everything else, he put that one up there. They said, "Why?" He says, "Everybody gets to pick their heroes, and that one's mine." I said, "Dude, this is my man. I'm loving this guy." But how do we move from cool literacy to institutionalizing Sankofa? The scribes have to do it. How do we make scribal stuff? We connect classrooms and literacies as places of Maat. That's a sign from the 50th anniversary march on Washington. Stand your ground. So they got Rosa on there. That's how we remember. She was bad. I'm going to put that with stand your ground. I'm going to confuse the narrative for you, but it makes perfect sense to me. That's how you have to get around in terms of Sankofa and believe believe that these young people have their literacies. Now I won't go talk about Abydos. These are some of the places where you see those kind of ways to connect literacy. Ahmed Baba, we can talk about him as a literacy connector. Congo Square, a place where Maat was restored. Louis Armstrong, we'll talk a little bit about him. The Haitian Revolution had icons and rituals of Maat. I don't know if many of you have seen this new film, Toussaint Louverture. It's long, but it's very interesting, the film. Of course, the Sisterhood of the Good Death. These are rituals of Maat. These sisters are bringing it back together. And human totems of Maat, whether it be Moses Wright saying Darheem, when they said, you see the man that took Emmett Till at your house, whether it be Fannie Lou Hamer saying, I question America, when they asked her at the Atlantic City at the Democratic Convention, or whether it be Rachel Jeantel, who sat on CNN and gave an eloquent description of what it means to be a creepy-ass cracker. That was not a misstatement. The last words on Trayvon Martin's mouth, she said, that's what somebody want to act like a police. In other words, I'm going to run you, this is how I remember it. Anyway, I'll stop. Well, look, can I have 2 minutes? 2? Because this is what Sankofa looks like if you have a little bit of memory. I got a lot of hope for the Williams sisters. I got one of my students is very, very close with them, and Serena particularly, who just likes to party all the time. And every time I see Carr, he's like, Dr. Carr, when are you going to hang out with us? Man, I can't hang out with you in the age of social media, even if it wasn't the age of social media, because y'all be buck wild. But the thing I like about these sisters, this is what Serena said, and I think I read this before the ASCAC, but I just love this quote. This is what happens when you have a little memory. She says, I don't know if my dad said something, but I don't need to go back there. She's talking about Indian Wells, where they used to, racism heavy in Florida. They don't like me. I don't need to be there. If you can boo a teenager, you can be white and 60 years old, you know what? I'm cool on you. Going back to Ellington's question of coolness, which is African really style. I can understand maybe if they were like 20, 15. In other words, the idea that a child may not have that context, right? But then she says, but like at the French Open, the crowd boos you, but they're young, they're kids, they're in a younger crowd. It is what it is. You just know every time you go to Paris, you get booed. But you see so many, kids in the crowd. At Indian Wells in Florida, everybody goes there when they're retired. It's like Palm Beach. These people got long memory. They've already constructed the black subject. She says, and here's where it gets very interesting to me. She says, I thought, here she is, historicity. I'm seeing myself in time and space. I gotta go back now. I'm going back to get it. She says, I thought people like Martin Luther King Jr. boycotted things. And this is nothing on that level. In other words, I'm not pretending I'm Martin Luther King. I know what that was. I know who I am. I'm looking forward, but I'm putting myself in this conversation. She says, look at Muhammad Ali. And if you haven't seen this film, try as Muhammad Ali, you should. It's really something. She says, he didn't even play. He went to jail because he didn't want to go to war. Now watch that. Did Muhammad Ali go to jail? No, he was on bail. We would have gone to jail. But my point is, that is historically inaccurate. But for Sankofa purposes, she has gotten the essence of the conversation. So we don't quibble on that, right? Then she says, she said, because he didn't want to go to jail, the war. The least I can do, now she brings it back to herself, this is the vision. The least I can do is stand up for my people and not go there. She says, that's the very least I can do. It's not even that hard of a decision. I get a vacation for those 2 weeks. It's like the easiest decision of my career. They can penalize me to death. I'm never going back. Now, just think about that. She's not talking about changing the world, but this is what happens when, the kids at Grambling who said, we're not playing, that can send a ripple effect. Bill Roden said it could have the effect of what happened in North Carolina A&T. And what happens if white athletes and black athletes in Alabama said they ain't going? I'm going to close with these kids. Picture I took in September. They were the African burial ground. The Sankofa moment. These little Negroes. I say that with all hope that maybe 10 of them will change something. Maybe one. We might only need one, because we only had one Jacob Carruthers, so he would have been in that picture, but I guess when he was 18, 19, we might not be able to see him. We would have seen his head, but we would have seen his fist in the air. But you only need one. Cherish, study, avoid the dance, so you'll become an excellent official. Write diligently by day, recite at night. Let your friends be the papyrus roll and the scribal palette. Such work is sweeter than wine. That's from the Royal Scribe Seshnisu. Neb Mare knocked to the scribe when in the Emun 20th Kemetic dynasty, 1500 BC.